Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Lion, the Way, and the War, where we discuss Jesus, his church, and the spiritual battle that surrounds us all. My name is Craig Allison, and I'll be your host. All right, joining me today as a return guest is Alex Burroughs, born and raised right here in Chattanooga, Tennessee. He's married to Megan. You guys have been married now for 13 years.
Yes, sir.
I got a daughter, and you went to Freed-Hardman and did some graduate work. For those who remember, you went and did some grad work, got your graduate studies done at Oxford, and in finance, right?
Yes, sir. Finance and strategy.
You are a certified financial planner, and you've been doing that job for, I think, around 10, 11, 12?
Well, 13 years.
13 years.
So we graduated got
years.
married, and started my job all within 2.5 weeks of each other.
Okay.
All that happened really quickly.
Awesome. And you are also, we were just talking before the show a little bit about, you are co-hosting a podcast also out of this studio called Digging Deeper. After Sunday,
yes,
yeah,
sir.
which I listen to, and that's a great podcast. So for those listening, by the way, you're only listening today. I should have said that right at the front. We, our producer Parker Allison is got tied up today, last minute stuff, and so we only have the audio version today. So guess what? You won't be distracted by my ugly face, which may be a good thing. But yeah, you co-host.
You turn it off when I get here. Everybody else gets audio or video.
No, it's just coincidence that you showed up on the day that we don't have any video. So co-hosting that podcast, which I listen to, and I think it's cool. I'm always kind of nervous to listen to that because you guys are basically critiquing me and the lesson for that Sunday, right?
I don't feel like we're critiquing. I feel like it's more of a what did we come away with. Because we might have come away with something different than somebody who was sitting in the audience and maybe just I don't want to say younger perspective of that. But there's no critique. Well, we're lucky to have you as our minister here. You do a wonderful job.
I was waiting to like hear you guys like close the show out with like, okay, guys. So for today's sermon, what do you rate it on a scale of 1 to 10? You know, like score me. Yeah. Well, today I'm gonna have to give it a 3 because it was not so great.
Okay, Sky, so next week we're going to have a rating, and we're going to do it every week. We're going to give Craig Allison a grade. So,
pressure's on.
And I got to thank your son Parker. So I know you host The Lion, the Way, and the War, and I get to co-host with Sky after Sunday. We get to talk, and people see us, but the amount of work, the lights, the cameras, the audio, the stuff that we were trying to figure out beforehand, he does a tremendous amount of work on that stuff. So,
he does, yeah.
I just want to thank him and all that he does for the congregation here at Central and to put these 2 podcasts on.
You know, I need to have him on this side and like make him interview me or something, like put him in the hot seat.
I asked him to be a guest on ours, and he just shook his head no.
Oh, so he's a chicken. Parker, you're a chicken. All right. So anyway, you're back again. Thanks for rejoining me. I said I was going to have you back on the show because the last one that you were on, there was a pretty good response to it, and people are concerned about finances and money stuff and the Christian perspective. So I've got some new topics today that I'm going to throw out at you, and we'll see where the conversation takes us. I think it's going to be good. I'm excited to sit down and talk with you about this stuff. So are you ready?
You always have me all for the go. The first question last time was, what do you think about a Trump presidency? And of course, that's not polarizing at all to anybody.
Not even a little bit.
And now we've got tariffs and debt and that sort of thing this week. So
yes, sir.
Thank you for making me a very hated person.
Okay. Well, that's we're going to start off with tariffs. Listen, I've had several conversations over the last, I'd say, month and a half, 6 to 8 weeks, have actually been pulled in to some online discussions and have made some comments, probably should not have made comments, but really they were coming from a place of just, I would say, a very elementary understanding of what they are, because I'm not a finance guy. I don't understand it. Not nearly as much as you probably do. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from today. I'm going to approach it from a very naive standpoint. So basically, first question is, what is a tariff? Why do we have them? Why do we use them? I know we're paying to get stuff into other countries, and other countries are paying to get their stuff into our country, and that's about all I know.
And what you just said before that is a very important concept that I think we all could do a better job of. And one thing that I always appreciate about doctors is that if I ask a pulmonologist a question on the heart, you know what their response is? Go see a cardiologist. That they know infinitely more than I do about the heart because they went to medical school and they studied biology and all these things, but they know their lane. And that has been a little frustrating dealing with tariffs. All of a sudden, everybody that studied ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs is now a tariff expert, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard for people to stay in their lanes. But a tariff, in essence, is a tax on an imported good. So, you know, we live in a global economy. When Milton Friedman gave a speech one time where he was talking about a pencil, and he was going through the different parts, and he said, you know, the graphite is made in this country, and the wood is actually made here in the United States, but the steel around the top here is made in Japan, and the rubber is made in this country in Africa. And he talked about how all those things came together to make a pencil. And you would say, well, all of the labor and the efficiency of being able to trade with all those countries to build this pencil for very cheap is a good thing. You know, global trade has benefited about every economy since it began. Their tariffs exist for a variety of reasons, but we're all still in competition with one another, right? At the end of the day, policymakers here in the U.S. want to protect U.S. jobs and U.S. goods and services. A policymaker in Japan wants the same thing. China, same thing. So we're still competing, but when you say, I want to tax a good coming into my country, there's a few major reasons why somebody would do that. A, you want to protect one of your industries, and one of those is called infant industry. So if you say you're in India and you're a developing nation and you are, you know, you've kind of been more in manufacturing and those sort of things for a while, but you develop to the point where you say, well, we're more in technology and more in the service industry. Well, you may say, look, we want to tax technology coming in from Japan or China or somewhere else to protect our own industry because we're trying to build that out. And we're going to tax that to make our consumers want that good less because it's going to be more expensive, right? They can buy ours or they can buy theirs that's more expensive. So it's to protect your own industry. Another reason is national security or national defense. An example I saw one time was the Native Americans, when the European settlers were coming in, they actually bought guns from the Europeans. And when they started having skirmishes and conflict, one of the things the Europeans did was they said, well, stop selling them bullets. So eventually the Native Americans ran out of bullets, and we kind of know the rest of the story there. But you don't really want to fight a kinetic war with somebody that you're relying on their steel or their manufacturing or their even medicine, for that fact. You know, you don't want medicine coming from a country that you're bombing. Yeah. So there's a national security component to it. There's a variety of reasons. Do you want to hurt a country to benefit yours somehow? But it all comes back to competition. And I think a lot of what goes into tariffs doesn't necessarily have to be a tariff, but you've probably heard of non-tariff barriers, right? Has that been something that's come up in the online chat rooms? Or
No, not at all.
You're being serious?
Yeah, I'm being serious. I have no idea what that even means.
When you hear Donald Trump say, you know, we've been, you know, taken advantage of, he said, by tariffs and all these other things. Well, all these other things encompasses a lot of different stuff. There's barriers that we have to trade with other countries that aren't just a tax on the good, right? That's kind of the easy thing to see is the tax. Right. But there's, and this all sort of comes back to China, and I'll circle back around to that here in just a second. But if you're China and you want to hurt the United States to benefit your own economy, you might say, well, you know, I don't want to buy shampoo or medicine from the United States because there's a safety concern that I've got, and I want to produce my own shampoo and my own medicine here. So I'm going to create this safety policy that says I'm not allowed to buy from the United States because Johnson & Johnson makes unsafe shampoo. So that's one thing. Licensing renewal, you have to have a license with anybody you trade with. This year, I think China has decided not to renew, I think it was just over 90 different agricultural licenses with American producers. So soybeans, corn, oranges, those sort of things that we've shipped to them in the past, they haven't even renewed. So they've said, you're not allowed to buy here. That's not necessarily a tax on the good, but when you say we're not going to buy it, when you reduce supply, all things being equal, you push up the price, right? Back to economics 101. Licenses, there's safety hazards. For instance, China makes tractors and John Deere makes tractors, right? So let
me stop you there because I'm getting information overload.
Gotcha.
Okay, so
I felt like I was going for a while there. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine, because my mind is simple. So you're probably going at everybody else's speed, but you're going too fast for me. So let me see if I'm understanding correctly. In a perfect world, we have this world collaborative effort where, yes, China's going to impose some taxes on the stuff that are coming in, but they're going to take our stuff, and that's good because it's going to benefit the person in the United States that's making the stuff to some degree. I mean, there's that profit that's being realized.
Yes.
And while we want to be protective of our own assets, we still understand that we live in a global world, and so we need to trade. We need to have those collaborative efforts going with other nations. So it's hey, we've got this we can sell you, and we can probably provide you with this stuff that's going to take too much time or energy or effort or expend your resources that you don't really have to make this stuff, but we have the resources. So you may pay a little extra for it because of the tax, but you get to have it in your country, and your people are happy because they need this stuff or they want this stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. It sounds like to me, though, what you just said is that some countries, namely China, is imposing a lot of restrictions on the stuff that we normally send them, and we may not have the same level of restrictions on them that they send us. So they're benefiting actually more because we haven't imposed all those restrictions on them. So it's not really fair anymore. The global market is not basically, everybody's not following the same set of rules.
We're supposed to, per the World Trade Organization or WTO, but who monitors that? You're supposed to self-monitor to a degree, and you've probably heard a lot in the news about intellectual property theft. Mm-hmm. China does that all the time. That's why their airplanes look a whole lot like ours do. That's why Russia's space shuttle looked a whole lot like ours do. They currency manipulation. There's rules that we're all supposed to follow that they're not necessarily following. And some other countries have been compliant, and I think that's why things were kind of rolled out as broadly as they were to start with. Mm-hmm. And I think those countries know, hey, we're watching you now, because there's ways you can circumvent a tariff, right? You can say, well, I'll ship this good from China to Vietnam to the United States. That way it's coming from Vietnam and not us, so it's going to be exempt from the tariff. Well, Vietnam would know what's going on at the time. So, it's people violating the rules, and we're all supposed to abide by them, but one country in particular hasn't done a good job of that.
And so is America getting a bad rap because we're pushing back on that, where other countries have just kind of shrugged their shoulders on them, like it's not a big deal kind of thing?
We're probably getting the bad rap, but for the same reason we got a bad rap when Mr. Trump was kind of harsh on NATO, wanting to push them to spend more on defense, right?
Yeah.
They wanted to use that money for social programs and other things, and we're saying, why are we protecting all of you guys? We're spending a whole lot on security, not just for us, but for the globe. You guys really aren't doing it. Why are we taking care of you and you're using your money for other stuff? So if you had the benefit of taking advantage or not playing by the rules, you're gonna give pushback when it hurts your own pocket.
So is this a deal, though, where, America, I don't think anybody would argue with, maybe some people would argue with this. I mean, America is America. We're the big boys in the room. We're the big player, and we've typically been looked at as I guess like the policemen of the world. We step in and we help other countries. Is it that global mentality that is being, I guess, from those that are coming from a different political ideology, looking at this, we need to play nice. We need to roll over. We need to not complain because we have, we have the power, we have the resources, we have the military might to be okay with having to pay more, being restricted more, because other countries are not where we're at. And so we just, we need to do the right thing and just be okay with, not, being kind of unfairly treated by the other nations.
And I think that's how we're viewed. But when you look down the road, and you and I talked about our national debt, before we came on air,
Mm-hmm.
that does play a role in it. Things appear to be okay, and we are the big boy on the block. But the road we're going down doesn't have a good end. I don't know if it's 10 years from now or 50 years from now, but what we're doing to take care of everybody and to keep the status quo long-term is just very unsustainable.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We're going to get into that next, but before we do that, I want to kind of finish talking about the tariffs a little bit more, because I'm thinking about this, and people are also probably thinking about what in the world does this have to do with Christianity? And so I'm thinking about several things. The first thing that pops into my mind, it seems to be the obvious thing, is just the divide that it causes, because everybody alluding to your point, everybody has a very strong opinion. Everybody's an expert on tariffs now, and that became very obvious to me when I did put a post out there, and I had no idea that there were so many people in my friends group that were geniuses on tariffs. And, I saw some divides there, and I saw some, it was all civil, because I've come to the place now where if things get, very divisive, I wipe the whole thing off of the social media stuff.
That's wise.
Yeah. But, there we are. It seems to be one of these issues that has created a whole lot of divisive opportunity amongst Christians.
And I hate to say it, but I feel like about any issue that's raised, if one side says left, the other says right. If one says up, the other says down, black, white, same thing. Whatever you want to do. And what's funny is to see some of these news networks that will say, okay, you guys on the left are bashing Trump for these policies. Here's Nancy Pelosi, or here's Bill Clinton 20, 30 years ago saying the exact same thing he is today.
Yeah.
So it's a divide of almost whatever you say, I'm going to take the other side of it, no matter what it is.
Yeah, and that speaks to we are so trapped in our current window of, purviewing what society looks like. We forget so often that when we go back just a few years ago, left ideology was mimicking a lot of the stuff that Trump is saying now. Well, people just don't like Trump, and so anything that he says is automatically evil. Or Barack Obama, same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Coming from the other side, that he was mimicking some stuff that looked really similar to some of the Reagan's things that were said, but because he's got a D after his name, he got attacked for
Mm-hmm.
a lot of stuff. And we just see that through the ages. It just shifts, and we're so focused on our current time that we just ignore history for whatever reason.
Yeah, and you got to give presidents credit where it's due, no matter what's by their name. But it takes a more mature mentality to do that, right? Mm-hmm. Than to say, well, whatever they do is going to be wrong. A lot of what I've been reading and some of our analyst reports, Biden put some tariffs and some non-tariff barriers on semiconductor chips coming from China, specifically NVIDIA and then TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductors. Mm-hmm. They both make chips.
Yeah.
And he wanted to regulate how much of that was getting to China or how much we were buying from them for national security reasons. Mm. So the policies weren't too different. Trump's a little more vocal about it and has escalated it to a broad sense. But it is sad to see just how polarizing, if one side says this, I can't be okay with it. And that's the thing. When you talk about policies with people or you talk about things, people are a lot more calm, a lot more collaborative in their discussion with you. Mm-hmm. When you talk about people, if you say Obama or Trump, mm-hmm. you get some weird reactions out of people.
Right.
So
yeah. So should Christians be concerned about tariffs? I mean, should it even matter? Should it be in our scope of daily thinking about, or tuning into it when we start hearing the radio talk about tariffs, or the news talking about tariffs? Should we stop and be like, oh, this is very concerning, I need to listen to this?
We're called not to be anxious about tomorrow, right? So in the grand scheme of things, by the end of the year, we won't be talking about tariffs, in my opinion. No matter what goes on in global markets, our focus should always be elsewhere. Mm-hmm. I think we are called to be prudent, and even the stewardship class that my father and I are doing on Wednesday nights, I think there are things that people need to do to insulate yourself from certain risk. If you're about to retire or something and you don't want a lot of equity exposure, a lot that's at risk to, do we have a tariff today, or do we have a dot-com bubble or a financial crisis? Yeah. There are prudent financial decisions you need to make, but the people that I talk to that are very unhappy are people that stay at home and they watch the news. Yeah. The people who are truly happy and have a purpose in life are out working for their church. They're volunteering at a hospital. They're out doing things, not worried about politics or what's going on in the news.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because I think it's a lesson for all of us to be more inclined to turn off the news, shut your phones off, and go do good. Go out there, see what you can do to help. And people don't understand too, there's a huge biological brain chemistry change that takes place, and it's been proven. When you do good stuff for people, when you help people, you want to talk about a serotonin dump. It's a great thing. It literally makes you happy. It makes you feel good. And I think there's, God knew that, and that's kind of probably behind some of the stuff why He said, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, the golden rule, because it brings golden blessings. It is a great thing. So yeah, thank you for pointing that out.
And you had a guest on last week, Chris Willis, who said something a month or two ago to us, and I think there were several things that we had coming up as a church, just different activities, and it was one of those where I thought, man, I've got a lot going on that week. I'd really just like a day to stay at home and catch up on your chores, relax a little bit. And he said, there's never been an activity with church friends or a volunteer opportunity that I've gone to that I've regretted.
Right.
And I thought, okay, I'll go.
Yeah.
And I went, and sure enough, I didn't regret it.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right, so we're going to shift gears, kind of go back into the weeds again, because, just as we sat here and talked about, don't be anxious. And then I find myself being anxious about our current debt of $36 trillion. And, realistically speaking, I mean, that's such it's not it's hard to fathom that level of debt that we have, which we didn't always have that. And so again, I'm looking at this from a Christian perspective, and I'm wondering, does this deserve any of my time? Is it something that needs to be part of my it's not going to affect my daily living. I mean, from day to day, but I look at my kids and I wonder what that looks like for them, and how that debt might actually impose some type of hindrance for, and some people will hear this and be like, how is that connection being made? But impose like some type of hindrance for their own ability to practice Christianity.
It's, if you ever want to feel anxious or depressed, go to Google and type in U.S. National Debt Clock.
Yeah.
And I pulled that up in the booth with Brother Brooks and Brandon the other day, and I think Brooks looked at it and he said, that is seizure-inducing. All of the different colors and letters and lights and stuff that are flickering on. But if you look up in the top left-hand corner of that, you do see the big number, the $36 trillion, which is, it's hard for me to comprehend. And I look at dollars and cents and numbers all day. Yeah. I can't imagine if you don't look at that, what that number must look like. But there's two numbers that are really concerning, and it's debt per taxpayer and debt per person. The debt per taxpayer that we have, this is just national debt. This isn't what you owe on your house or credit card debt or anything that. We'll probably get to that in a second. But as a country, I think today you're $323,000 in debt per taxpayer. Per person, you're $107,000 in debt.
That's every single person in the United States.
Every single person. And I look at my 2-year-old daughter, 2 years old, and I think you're $107,000 in debt the day you come into this world.
Mm.
That's a sad thought.
Yeah.
And it's done. And you want to get back to politics, Republicans and Democrats have done a horrible job on both sides for years and years. One side, I could argue more so than the other one, but they've both been pretty unreasonable. The 36 trillion, you know, we take in 5 trillion in tax receipts every year, close to 5 trillion, but we spend 7 trillion. That's like somebody earning $65,000 a year and spending $100,000 in perpetuity. And you think, there's no way I would run my household like that. Why does the country think they can run their balance sheet like that?
So what happens, because I understand that a lot of the debt is owed to China. So if they call payment on us,
And they have been the last couple of weeks.
right? So what realistically, I mean, what does that look like for America?
China so as an external buyer, China owns, I think they're the number one buyer of our debt. And when I say debt, when people think of U.S. Treasury bonds, Treasury bills, bonds, T-bills, those kind of things, debt that's issued by our Treasury. Money markets, if you've got a money market at a bank or a savings account, all of that is invested in Treasury bills. The bank takes that, they take your money, they go invest it, and they give you, some interest, and they take the spread. So we own most of our debt per individual U.S. persons. Mm-hmm. China owns a significant amount, but there's also a lot of Europe owns our debt. China owns our debt. Korea. It is a risk, and we've seen that over the last couple of weeks. China has started dumping. Now, I think they understand that they can't dump it fast enough because there are some trading mechanisms that make it very hard for them to do that. Mm-hmm. But when you see bond yields rise, that means people are getting rid of their debt, and it makes it more costly for us to borrow. So think of it like when they dump our debt, we get a worse credit score for it. So if we have to borrow at 5%, that's much less favorable than us borrowing at 3%.
Right.
And that's what happens when our debt is sold.
And so you're saying that, when we're looking at a global economy now, we have to have a good credit score if we want to function like we've been functioning.
And the joke is we're the cleanest shirt in the dirty laundry pile.
Okay.
Because no other country is really that prudent or fiscally responsible either. But we're just bigger than everybody else.
Okay. So how does this look then, realistically? Like does this, for our kids, so to speak, if the debt continues to rise, and I don't have any reason to believe that it's not going to continue to rise, does that really impact my kids down the road? I mean, does it have any bearing on their normal day-to-day living?
It will. In other countries that we've seen this play out in, if you look at some of the Nordic countries in the 60s and 70s, you reach a point where you have to take, it's called austerity measures, and that is you have to raise taxes and you have to cut benefits that you're giving. And there's been a lot of talk around Doge and Elon Musk and that sort of thing, and right. That's even a counter now on the national debt clock. But when you think about the, either $200 or $300 billion that he saved and watching shrimp run on treadmills and things like that are just, crazy, mm-hmm. That's still a drop in the bucket to the $7 trillion that we spend. Over 80% of what we spend is on what we call entitlement programs, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Mm-hmm. And we've got a demographic problem in that we're aging as a population, and there's fewer of me and you paying into the Social Security system and more people that are taking out, and that trend's not looking any better. So for us to really tackle the debt, we've got to make some hard decisions around Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
Okay. So is it, somebody said, and I don't know if this is true or not, that our interest that's accumulating per year is on our debt is more than we spend the entirety of our defense budget.
It was over $900 billion last year, and that's about where we are defense-wise. This year, it'll be about 1.5 times that. So it wouldn't shock me if it was $1.5 trillion in interest. Okay. And that hurts because we've had inflation. And again, when you have stimulus programs, and you could blame COVID or Inflation Reduction Act or whatever you want to blame, a lot of government spending under the last administration, we printed $4.4 trillion. We created that much currency. That led to inflation, which led to the Fed having to raise interest rates to cool the economy. And we're having to borrow now at closer to 5% than we were at basically less than 1%.
so if we don't get a handle on this, if we don't do something soon to change this trajectory, the perfect storm is building. And I when I say that, I'm not trying to exaggerate. I mean, it's like you can't not see that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is building. If we don't make, people are complaining about Elon Musk and they're saying a chainsaw, but it sounds like to me we need more than a chainsaw even to make any difference. I mean, it may not be Elon Musk and Doge and something, but something's got to give somewhere. So if we don't do that, what does this look like then, say 10 years down the road, 1 decade down the road, and does this trickle down into does this impact the church? Can it impact the church? Is there...
When we get to that point, it will affect everybody, I would assume, in a pretty extreme way. We used to have, a 90% tax rate on people that made over a certain amount of income. Mm-hmm. And I could see us realistically having to go back to that to pay for certain things and to have your benefits cut. But you think, and 10 years down the road is not wild to mention. But if you're listening to this and you get a Social Security statement, turn it over to page 2 and read the little fine print that says, if Congress doesn't act by, I think it's 2032 or something like that, there will be an automatic 40% reduction in your benefit. That's already built into Social Security statements. So if you think look at our pews and how many people are probably on Social Security, and that's their main source of income, and older people in any Church of Christ tend to outgive most everybody else, just from what I've seen.
Yeah, that's true.
And that hurts our budget, which hurts our ability to hire good ministers or do mission work, or it takes money to do that. At the end of the day, it takes us people doing acts of good, but money is a resource that's very valuable for church work.
And I don't think a lot of people see that, especially those that are more inclined to be coming from like the liberal side of things, because it's, let's address the situation that's right in front of us and let's not worry about, 2 years down the road, let alone 10 years down the road. But if we get to that point and we're not making preparations, we're not being good stewards, we're not being diligent about how we spend money, then it sounds like to me we end up hurting or not being able to be a resource for a lot of needy different places. And I know, like here at Central, we just one example, we purchase and the way we purchase this is direct contributions from our members. So you give a check, and the church takes that money, and we go out and we buy food, and we pack lunch bags. And we give a ton of those lunches away every single day. As a matter of fact, I had a guy come today, and he needed 3 of them because he was food insecure. And he's utilizing other community resources too, because there's other places. But the church plays a big part in covering the gap that some of these other places don't. And so that's a direct way that we are, being the hands and feet of Jesus and helping the least of these. Chris Willis talked about that a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, that we need to be the least of these. And I 100% agree with that. But if we don't pull back from this a little bit and have I think a bigger macro perspective on how this trickles down and impacts everybody's pocketbook and what this actually means, I mean, we can't ignore global finances and this debt clock that's ticking. We're owing trillions. At least this is my personal viewpoint. I don't know if that's like being overly zealous or cautious or just paranoid. I don't know.
I'd rather address a problem before it happens, or at least early on, than to wait till it's a big mistake or a big problem.
Yeah.
That's just been my view, but it is hard to ignore. And I think God doesn't talk about politics much. He says, render unto Caesar, obey the laws of the land. There's not a whole lot but we are called to be prudent. The parable of the talents, we're told to be good with what we have.
Yeah.
Manage well what you're overseeing. And I think we should be prudent in who we elect. And I'm not going to come on here and advocate for a political party or anything. I don't even know if I'm allowed to do that. But we should be paying attention to those things because that will have an impact. And again, it's hard to say, is it 10 years away or is it 50? How does that look? But from what I can gather, the conversations that we've had, I think you're probably financially secure. Mm-hmm. If I missed a paycheck this month, we would be okay. Mm-hmm. But there are people that's not the case. There's an alarming percentage of Americans that are paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
And a very minor change in the tax code could make that person say, well, I was giving this, but now I have to give this because I've got to have food for my kids.
Yeah.
And that's something that because we are at a point in life that I'm not as worried about money, not wealthy or anything like that, but I'm not anxious about it.
Right.
But there's so many people that they're right on the edge of a knife of I'm able to do this or I'm not. Yeah. And that hurts me to think about.
Yeah, this is tough. I mean, because I'm looking at this from the standpoint of, and you brought it up just a minute ago, don't be anxious for tomorrow. Tomorrow is going to take care of itself. But that's juxtapositioned against this other idea of being prudent and being good stewards and preparing and, not walking into each day like a imbecile, totally naive and unprepared. And so somewhere in the middle there, I think, is a balance. And I think that's part of the political divide is that balance is rare. A lot of people don't have that balance. They're either completely naive and be like, let's just take care of the people in front of us and not think about tomorrow, not think about next week. And then you got the other people that are, the sky is falling. Let's freak out.
Yeah. and unfortunately, the people who maybe tend to be a little naive as to what the bigger problem is or a problem that's coming down the road are the ones that do a great job of, well, what can I do right now? I can give this homeless person food. Mm-hmm. They tend to be very generous people in the moment. And then kind of the people that are maybe more like me, I'll pick on myself. Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm not as nice to people as I should be, but I'm worried about problems like this that I know are coming down the road.
Yeah.
And it takes all types, but when you see the train coming down the tracks, it's hard to ignore.
And it's probably part of my background too, working for the state and dealing with people that were truly the least of these. And I always approach that, I can give them a handout today and it'll take care of their needs today. But how can I provide resources to this person? How can I train this person? How can I teach this person to lift themselves up out of this, not be reliant on the government? Because I know that's ultimately going to bring them a lot more peace and joy and stress-free living and contributing to society and then maybe being a leader and plugging into church and becoming faithful and spiritually minded. So all of that packaged in is kind of where I'm coming. It's the whole give the man a fish, feed him for a day,
yes,
right?
Sir.
Teach him how to fish, feed him for a lifetime. But there's a lot of wisdom and truth in that, and this is going to sound super judgmental, but there's a lot of truly soft-hearted friends that I have that are on the liberal side of things. Love them dearly, but they don't. It's like they just don't understand that concept of bringing a person up, and it may mean that they don't get those handouts right now or in the way that they expect to get them. But they're getting something else that's going to, be more of a long-term solution for them.
And it's kind of hard. It's almost, make a parenting analogy here. It's easy for me to give Claire something, and that'll make her happy. Oh, here, you can have this, or here, let me put you on the bike. But it's better for her if I let her struggle to ride her bike, or struggle to shoot a basketball, or do something like, or climb up whatever she's trying to climb up. It's better for her because now she knows how to climb up on whatever playground that she's on or something. It's hard for me to watch her struggle.
But you let her do it anyway.
But that's what's best for her.
You're so evil.
But some people would say that. And,
right.
And I feel evil while it's happening. I had to spank her the other day. She just wasn't listening. And I felt horrible. I literally was almost in tears because as soon as I did, I hug her. Daddy loves you, but we can't do that. We can't be near the street. It's for our own safety.
Yeah.
You hate to watch them suffer, but sometimes there's benefit in suffering.
So, I mean, is this just a difference in ideology? Like what, are you right versus I'm wrong on this?
I'm right.
Okay. Well, that solves that. Let's move on to the next subject. No, but seriously,
I may be wrong, but I'm never unsure. That's a quote my dad always says.
Is it just a difference in ideology, and should we be concerned about that difference? Does it does it make a difference in the long run? I mean, to me, logically, what you've spelled out with the debt and all of that, I'm much more inclined to see the long term impact and how that damages more people in a way that is truly detrimental versus a short term solution.
I think managing that, but having the heart of this is for your own good or for my own good or for collectively our good. Sometimes I think we have a little bit of a jaded attitude when we say, well, why aren't you worried about this? You should be, and we need to fix this, and you're part of the problem. But I want some of these issues down the road fixed, not just for me, but for you and for even people that disagree with me. Yep. Because we're all in the boat together.
Right.
And we're all going to have to face this whenever it comes, but I think it's better if the boat addresses it now. But to have the heart of somebody who maybe lives a little more in the moment.
Yeah. Okay. So is Trump doing the right thing long term with tariffs? Or does because I've seen the impact of what he's doing on my 401k. I don't like it. It's very painful for me. I'm not panicking, but man, oh man, I've lost a lot of money.
Well, and put this in context, the S&P is down 7% from its highs. The Dow, I think, is only down 5%. The NASDAQ down 17, I think, today. Mm-hmm. We were down like 1,000 points when I left to come down here. So I was trying to hang up the phone with somebody to be able to get down here. But that's a blip on the radar. You know what I mean? We've been down. If you go back to the crash of 87 or 2008, we were down 55% high to low.
Yep, I got hit on that one too.
That would be 5 times what we've seen already, a little more than 5 times.
Yeah.
COVID down 40%. But what a lot of people don't realize is that if you go back to 1987, the crash, Black Monday, we were positive that year. The market was up 2.2% in 1987, and most people think, well, that was the worst year ever. No, if you held on, you were fine.
Yeah.
There are these short-term dislocations that will happen within markets, but over the long term, and back to your question on what Trump is doing, this will cause disruption and dislocations in the short term, but we have to. It's almost like taking your medicine, and the problem almost feels like, going to be a little dark here, but cancer, right? You may not know you have it other than an image detection, an X-ray or CT scan or something like that would show it. You may feel fine. You may be able to work out and exercise, but there's something going on that's going to kill you.
Right.
The treatment for that, chemo or radiation, they're both not pretty.
Yeah. They
cause a lot of damage to a lot of other things. Sometimes you do need to break some stuff to be able to heal and recover from what the problem is.
Right.
So long term, NVIDIA yesterday announced a $500 billion investment in the United States.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen overnight, but a lot of what this is I think it's aimed at China because they've broken the rules.
Right.
We've had to cause some disruption. We now know that we've got a lot of friends. They depend on our consumer. I think this benefits us in the long run, but in the short run, it is going to hurt our 401ks and cause some disruption.
It's been kind of amazing to me how many of our global folks out there are wanting to come to the table now and negotiate stuff. And I think most of that is just Trump. I mean, how do you figure out Trump? It's like he's kind of unhinged in a lot of ways, and it's,
And I think that's a little by design. If you've read his book, The Art of the Deal, there's some things that I want to say, like, what's your objective? What are you trying to do here? And I didn't get this from him, but Scott Bessent, our trade secretary or Treasury secretary, somebody asked him a question the other day. They said when he pulled back the tariffs on every other country and then increased them on China, they said, was this all along a trade war with China? And he kind of smiled for a second. He said, well, you called it a trade war. We didn't call it that, but they retaliated. But his smile after that question, I thought that was the target all along. Yeah. But you don't really want to show your hand before you play it.
Well, there's an interview of him going back 20, 25, 30 years ago. And somebody asked him that. He came right out and said, we need to tariff China at 25%. That was back, years ago. So this has always been part of, it seems like part of his playbook, but you just don't know what the guy, it seems like you just don't, is he playing chess and everybody else is playing checkers, or what's, is he truly financially that savvy, or is he just like shooting from the hip on a lot of this stuff? Do you think? I mean, I know
I think he's more savvy than what we give him credit for. There's some things that I wish would maybe take a little more calculation and not as broad of a, but I think, again, that's part of his art of the deal. I'm going to start very extreme, and then I'm going to start pulling back to the middle, but I was aiming for the middle all
that's
along.
where, yeah.
And I think the ambiguity and the obscurity of what he does is part of the process.
Does the tariff stuff have any effect on our debt, the $36 trillion? Is that part of his game plan too, to make a sizable chunk of that?
In the short term, it could help. That's how Alexander Hamilton created revenue. We didn't have an income tax until 1913.
That's correct.
So Hamilton, the original tariff guy, created a lot of revenue for us. Mm-hmm. I think the idea is to get revenue now, but while we're getting the revenue, move some of that industry back to the United States or even Canada or Mexico that he's treated a little more favorably than some others, shorten the supply line maybe.
Yeah.
And move some of that manufacturing back here, and then you can lower the tariffs, because tariffs long-term are not good. They're not healthy, but short-term can be used as a negotiating tool.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned Alexander Hamilton, because I just got done reading this massive tome on him, the biographer that wrote, and he talks about this very thing. And I think everybody, Hamilton was a genius. This guy was a intellectual giant. And a lot of the stuff that I'm seeing right now seems very similar to the stuff that Alexander Hamilton was doing. Our whole the modern system of banking, just so much tariffs. All of that is in his wheelhouse.
Now, Hamilton was playing chess when we were all playing checkers.
Yeah,
and that's
or
sure.
tic-tac-toe.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's close out then with this discussion, because this is really what I wanted to get to, which is very relevant, I think, more relevant than these two things, although I was hoping for people to see, the debt and the tariffs are relevant. They do have relevancy in our everyday life, but not as much as this third point, which is debt. You and I had a conversation on Sunday, and it has just floored me. I've been thinking about this nonstop since Sunday. We were talking about Disney and vacations and that kind of stuff. And you had mentioned the fact that, and I think you might have given a percentage of people that charge, that use a credit card to charge their Disney vacation.
Over 50%. I think I said 60, but I think it's in the mid 50s.
And so, I would like to assume that those folks are immediately that month paying that all off on their credit card, but it's debt that's carried
debt.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about the Mickey Mouse mortgage. And then
you need to coin that term.
Because you're basically, and I was telling you here just a minute ago. Sorry for the noise there, folks. I was telling you a minute ago, because I was looking this stuff up, because I took a Disney trip with our family of 5, like decades ago, 20 years ago, something like that. My kids were little, and it was expensive back then, and it pales in comparison now. Family of 4, if you do it like super budget, like you're not eating the meal plan in Disney, you're not doing any of that, you're like staying at the cheapest of cheap places in the park. Then your tickets, you're not purchasing any of the like fast pass stuff or anything like that. $6,500, $6,500.
It's incredible.
And that is the cheapest. That's a family of 4. If you do the like really nice vacation that a lot of people want to do, you stay at the higher end resort. You're eating, so you're not starving for the week. You're getting some of the meal plans, eating with the Disney characters because you want your kids to eat with Winnie the Pooh and Mickey Mouse and that kind of stuff. $16,000, and then it goes up from there. Like starts at 16 and goes up from there.
That's just an astronomical number.
How in the world? Like, is that even, like, should Christians even be going to Disney at that price?
I will say this. I think myself a prudent person most of the time, and then I take my daughter to, there's a restaurant there called Akershus where you get to, eat with all the Disney princesses, Ariel and Cinderella and that kind of thing. And to see her face when she sees those princesses that she's watched on TV for the last however many months,
Yeah.
I mean, take my money,
Yeah.
right? If it makes her happy, just
She's
do
got
it.
you so wrapped around her
And
finger, man.
Megan looks at it, she's like, "You're such a sucker. You know, you do anything she wants, you would do for."
Yeah.
And they're not wrong. There is an emotional component to this spending.
Right.
And you and I had talked about a little bit about when you have money, what you should spend it on. But when there's things like this, Disney's a luxury. You know, when you think of vacations, people go to the beach or Gatlinburg or something like that, and those are nice vacations. But Disney's very much a luxury and a, you know, just something that's aspirational. But I think a bunch of people feel like we're entitled to go just because we want to, just because we want it real bad.
Yeah.
And that's part of our society is, you know, I want all the things and I want them now because I see it from other people. And
Right.
I mentioned social media. I
Yeah.
think
Because
contributed
all your
to
friends
that.
are going to Disney. Why can't I go to Disney? Well,
Yes,
because
sir.
you don't have the money. That's why you can't go to Disney. Okay, well then, and then there we have the charging situation. I'm going to go to Disney because I want what I want, and I'm going to charge it.
And you're talking about debt a little bit, and that's part of me and Dad's class tonight is going into debt. And we're going to make the case there's good debt and bad debt. And I would never say credit card debt or debt to go do something that's a luxury and a privilege, that's a good debt. You know what I mean? Your house, a mortgage, an appreciating asset. Yes, your education, if you go to school to be a doctor, an engineer or something like that, yes, that's an appreciating asset. You make money from those things, but a vacation is hard. I don't want to chase a rabbit, but I look at watches sometimes online just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
And I found this thing on a website, and it was almost like, here's the price of the watch, but right below it, there's a little company called Affirm, and it said, if, you know, for 6 easy payments of this, or 12 easy payments, or 3-year plan. And I thought, nobody should be financing a luxury watch, but they make it so easy to do that.
Yeah. It's a trap, right?
It is.
I remember when my wife and I were early in marriage, and we, you know, could hardly rub a dime between us. You know, it was just like we were pretty poor, and we didn't have enough money to take a vacation, so we had, you know, had some gas in the car. We were just going to do like a little mini road trip, right? And so we're somewhere in Northwest Georgia, and we're going to this little town to like walk through some antique places. And there's this little gas station, and this lady's selling cow rugs at the gas station. And I don't know what it was. I must have been in my cowboy era, but I immediately knew that life was not complete unless I had a cow rug. And
I'm having a hard time picturing cowboy era Craig.
It was a thing. You can talk to my wife about it. And I think, I can't remember, it's like $200 for this cow rug. It didn't have $200, but I had a credit card. And so I bought that cow rug with that credit card. And, you know, that first week, seeing it on the floor laid out there, I was so happy with that cow rug. And by the way, had the cow rug for many, many years. And after about a week, though, buyer's remorse, and, you know, now I got that credit card, you know, and I know 200 doesn't sound like a ton of money. Back then it was a lot of money. And I ended up paying way more than $200 for that silly cow rug. And, you know, it's to your point, it's like you want what you want when you want it. And I get that there's a lot of Christians out there who feel like, you know what, I deserve a vacation. I've worked hard, and I'm not in a good state of mind unless I take this vacation. And everybody else is going to Disney World, and I'm getting older. And you know what? I'm going to splurge. I'm going to do this. And yes, I'm going to have to charge it, but I'll figure that out later.
Mm-hmm.
How do you defeat that? I mean, how do you overcome? Because that's a big mistake, especially when you're talking about the amount of dollars that it takes to go to Disney.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're not talking about a $200 cow rug, even though that wasn't right either, I don't think. But
And we're warned about excessive debt. You know, I feel bad for Gen Z because I've looked at kind of the profile of what somebody who's graduating college that's going into the workforce, what their income is versus what their rent or their mortgage is going to be, and a car payment, a credit card debt. And it's hard.
yeah,
You know, you start off rough. But the mindset of, I've talked to some people. I do some pro bono work that I've got to do for my CFP license, and I get these people that will call and they'll come in, and it's usually younger folks that will come in and they'll say, well, I'm this much in debt, but we want to do this. And I'll say, okay, like let's prioritize what we want. Is your priority, I want to drive a nice car? Because they'll roll up in BMWs and things like that are luxury cars, not necessity cars. And they'll say like, well, yeah, we like having a nice car, but that's not the main thing. We really want to travel. It's like, okay, well, I'll put travel at the top of the list. Well, we actually want to move. There's this neighborhood that we really like. We really want the nice house. It's like, okay, I'll put the nice house down. And you start seeing that their priority is everything they want.
Right.
They have a hard time saying, well, here's my priorities, and I can actually rank these and do without. But nobody wants to do without. And again, I'm sure you will have a guest that's far more qualified to talk about social media than I am. But we were talking beforehand about what you see on Facebook or Instagram or whatever is out there now that I don't know about. People portray having lifestyles where you can have it all. And that's the messaging for what they're trying to sell you or get you to believe is you can have all of this.
Yeah.
And when you know those people in real life, you know that's not reality. But that's what people are on their phones seeing every day and every night. And it's not healthy.
Yeah. Is there a solution to this?
Turn off your phone.
That's it. It's that simple. Turn it off.
And I don't know if it's a simple solution, but we're called to be content, right? And I forgot the verse where that is. You may have to help me as a minister.
I'm drawing a blank too, and you put me on the spot.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. We'll look it up later, but we're called to be content.
Yeah. But Paul talks about it in all things. I'm content. That's the context there. You know,
Gotcha.
he's been through all of this stuff. You know, gone through all of this pain and stuff. But in all things, he's content.
Yes, sir. Yeah. But to a point you made earlier of getting out and doing things, you know, volunteering or being involved in your church. When you're volunteering and you're working for the Lord and you're doing the things we should be doing that we're called to do, you don't have time to want watches and cars or vacations, right?
Yeah.
You get satisfaction and joy, true joy from doing those things. And you'll feel happier doing those things than you will any cow rug or any car that you could ever buy.
Yeah. I don't know if I should have told you that story now because you're going to hold the cow rug over me, I feel like, for a while.
I know some good Christmas gifts to get you in the future.
All right. So, you know, as I'm kind of processing and thinking about this then from the standpoint of, you know, the biblical, and we see this in more, you know, several different places. Proverbs 22 is one where I'm thinking there seems to be an understanding that we should not borrow nor lend, that we should not be in debt to anybody or anything, and that we should be extremely careful about lending money to be so having holding that over somebody else as a lender. What does that look like for you? Like, is that should Christians have any debt whatsoever? I mean, you talked about good debt, but does that extend the biblical stuff? Does that extend to all things?
And there is a little nuance in some verses make it sound like you can't have debt, but then we'll go on to say, well, here's how you pay your debts. And there's even, and I'm forgetting the verse now, but it's on the seventh year you forgive the debts. And
year of Jubilee.
If you lend money to a friend, don't charge interest on that loan. And I think those were principles around don't take advantage of your friends. You know, if you needed $20 for, you know, a dinner tonight or something, I can lend you $20. I'm not going to say, well, you owe me, you know, 25 because there's interest on that.
Yeah.
That's you trying to, you know, take advantage of somebody.
Right.
But even Elisha and the woman with the oil, you know, at the end of that story, we talked about how, you know, she's got enough to feed her and her son, and there's leftover at the end, and he said, go sell that and pay your debts.
Yeah.
And in the society we live in, it would sound tone deaf on my part to say that you just should never have any debt. So if you go back to that Gen Z college graduate today, where are you going to live? Yeah. You got to move back in with mom and dad. Well, what if mom and dad's not an option? Yeah. You're either homeless or you take on some sort of debt. But there are principles for that. And there are good debts. And when you look at buying cars, a depreciating asset, that is bad debt. We're called to be prudent in how we manage that. Yeah. And we're called, first of all, to pay those back. Right. You know, there's some people that will say like, well, you know, I'm going to get this student loan debt forgiven, or I don't have to pay that, or this isn't real. And there is almost a mentality of some younger people of, well, that's not real because it's so far out there in the future. It's real. And as Christians, we need to pay that back.
Yeah. So
I may have missed your original
no,
question.
no, no. Yeah, I think the idea here is that we're prudent, we're responsible. If we do have to take on debt, we're eager to pay it back, to not have that debt, and hopefully to get to a place as quickly as possible where we're not beholden to anybody, and then that frees up our resources where we can be crazy generous to the Lord, and that's I think where we all want to be, where God wants us to be, and all along that way, though, and I think this is the idea of prudence, and I don't know if this is something that you guys are addressing in your class, this idea of giving back to God, no matter where you are, because the God doesn't differentiate, that specifically. And so trying to figure that out in today's society of giving back to God, whatever portion you've deemed in your heart is necessary. Old Testament, they had the standard 10%. But when you dig a little bit deeper there, it wasn't so much the amount as it was the things that were precious to you. So it was the first fruits, it was the unblemished calf. So it's stuff that had meaning to you, and I think that's something that maybe we're missing today in this whole debt conversation, is that debt impacts our ability to give of our first fruits back to God. So, for example, real world scenario, if you've reached a place in your life where you feel like you've earned the right to take a $10,000, $15,000 trip to Disney World, and you're not giving at least that much in your monetary assets to God, and you're also not giving of your time, in ways, because you've rationalized that, the way you're going to give back to God of your first fruits is through your money, which is a perfectly reasonable way, to do that. How does that look then? I don't see how that looks as far as giving more to Disney than you give to God, monetarily speaking.
Hard to justify, especially when I could almost justify a trip or a vacation. We talked about making memories and spending time with your family,
right,
much more easily than I could somebody buying the car or buying the cow rug,
yeah,
or what the expensive watch, things that don't matter and won't matter to anybody. You can't take it with you.
Yeah,
and that does show where our focus and where our heart is what you're paying attention to and spending your time or money on.
mm-hmm.
And if you're spending all your time looking at watches or nice stuff, you're going to spend your money on that as well, and that's now your God.
Yeah.
If you're spending your time at church and with your family and doing good and doing what God has called us to do, that's less time to think about our earthly gods.
Yeah.
So I do think that shows an overall just picture of where your heart is. Yeah. And I've joked with people before, if you show me a company's balance sheet or you show me a church's budget, I'll tell you where their priorities are real quick, because it's where they're spending their money.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm thinking about this from a standpoint too of, and I want to be realistic with this, because you've mentioned it a couple times. I know that there's Gen Zers that would listen to this and go, "Man, you've got to be kidding me!" Like, you're talking about giving back first fruits to God, or making I don't even have enough money to buy myself food, Mm-hmm. And there's many times that I've had to use a credit card to buy food. And they're living frugally. It's not like they're out going to Disney and spending a bunch of money. And that's kind of the society we're in now, where it's so hard for recent, just current college graduates or people just starting out, because everything is so much more money than it was when I got out of college, mm-hmm. right? So, man, what do we say to those people? Like, how do we deal with that?
And I struggle with that too. I don't think there's ever a point in life. You always say, well, when I take care of this, or when I get my car paid off, or when I save enough for my kid to go to college, or when I do this, then I'll give more. If that's your attitude, you'll never get there, because there's always something else. There's always another goal that you've got personally. But you really have to, and again, I'm talking to myself as much as anybody. We give online, and it's kind of automated, and that's maybe taken a little bit out of it for me to say, here's what I'm actually giving.
Yeah.
So I could do a better job here. But I think giving for the college student you just mentioned, I don't think it has to be money.
Right.
There was the woman that gave the 2 mites, and I know that's a currency, but it could be, I'm going to spend my time here. That's as precious as money is sometimes. I'm going to help with this program that we've got. I'm going to help, print these copies of the bulletin or whatever it is.
I'm going to go mow the preacher's grass.
Mow the preacher's grass. I'm going to wash his car. I'm going to shine his hubcaps. Yeah. Polish his cow rug.
I didn't say any of that. I was just throwing something out there as an idea, right?
But it doesn't. You give what you can.
Yeah.
And I think if you've got the right heart, maybe it doesn't have to be monetary.
Yeah.
And I don't want somebody to go away thinking, well, this guy said you don't have to give of your money. We're called to give of our means.
Yeah.
But if that's all you've got to give, I think that's what you give.
Yeah.
And again, I feel for Gen Z. I'm not in the position of the average millennial when we graduated college. My parents sacrificed to put me and my sister through college and give us a better start than other people have. So I know I don't want to sound tone deaf in the struggles that some of these people will have that don't have that support system.
Yeah.
But you give what you can, and I'm talking to myself as much as anybody, because you can't wait until you've got this much money or when you've got this box checked to be giving more.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Okay. So I thought we're probably out of time.
I haven't been looking.
I have no idea. Normally that light over there goes on, but Parker's not here to turn it on, so I don't know how long we've been talking. But this has been a good conversation. I've learned stuff about tariffs. I've learned stuff about the debt, and I think the national debt, and about personal debt. And I think that there's lots of opportunity here for us as Christians to be more cognizant of not only our own debt and what we're deciding to put on credit card debt, but being aware of the struggles for the younger folks that are out there, that the real situation that they're in, and that that it is nuanced, and we should handle that compassionately and be aware of those things. So
I've really enjoyed it, and if I could give a plug for your sermons for the rest of the month, not having to have everything that you see could also build a better sense of community.
Yeah.
We don't have a swing set in our backyard, but we've got neighbors that do.
Right.
So if you say, well, I could buy this swing set or finance this swing set, or I could go down and visit my neighbors and spend more time with them.
Yeah.
Or I could go visit family or something like that.
Yeah.
There's ways of borrowing things that you don't have to have it all. You just have to know the people that do, and it builds a sense of community.
Love it. Or build a relationship with the people that have the stuff that that
Absolutely.
you don't have, that they would enjoy that company as well.
Yes, sir.
That's a great point. Okay, so just a few plugs here before we close things out. We've got our Ministry League as one of our sponsors. We greatly appreciate all the work that they do. They continue to grow. They've got some stuff going on. If you haven't checked out Ministry League, you need to do that. They're doing some conferences and some other stuff. They have an incredible app that I always push. You need to download that if that's talking about social media and bad apps. That's actually a good app, and for that app that you download, it will cancel out 2 bad apps that you have. I think that's the math that we do on that. So just download the app, Alex. That's an app you can have, right? Because I know you're not on social media, but it's got some good stuff. Also plugging you guys. The Digging Deeper podcast is a great podcast to listen to. If you don't want to listen to my sermons, you can get the Cliff Notes versions, 10, 15 minutes. So it's I love listening to that on my way to work on Mondays or Tuesdays.
Parker cuts us off at 15. It's a real easy listen. So.
It's done at 15 no matter what, right?
Yes, sir.
Check those 2 things out. If you want to email us at thelinetheWayandthewar@gmail.com with questions or comments or suggestions about things that you might like to hear. And, I've already said to you, Alex, before that, we get a great response when you're here. There's questions that are asked, and these happen to be some that came my way. And so, we'll probably have you back on. We've got you and another person that are good recurring guests that deal with like some mental health issues stuff. So looking forward to having you back again with some.
I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you for the opportunity.
Some other questions. Absolutely. You got a scripture that you want to close us out with the show?
I do. In talking about money and debt and things that surround our finances, if you look at Proverbs 21, verse 5, the plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's something to the planning aspect and the taking time to reflect on what's really important, because if you do take time and you don't make decisions in the moment of I need this or I need this cow rug or whatever it may be, and you say, what's really important to me, you find what your priorities are, and they align more with what we're called to do. We're called to give back. We're called to go spread the gospel. And I think thoughtful planning has a lot to do that. That's in my job title, planner, right?
Yeah.
And I think planning should maybe be a little more of a priority for most of us.
Yeah. Great. Hey, point of the podcast, don't charge cow rugs. Until our next podcast of The Lion, the Way, and the War, love one another, be kind to one another. Remember that the creator of the universe loves you so much that he gave up his only son for you. Until our next podcast, then, have a blessed day.